to a shamanic experience. I'm Katie Weatherup, shamanic practitioner and solo traveler. If you believe mountains hold ancient wisdom and rivers cleanse, you're in the right place. Let's explore the energy and magic of places near and far, and I'll share practical travel tips along the way, one sacred location at a time. In early May of 2025, I traveled up to Whitehorse and spent some time bebopping around the Yukon and a bit of the Alaska Highway, which exists in Canada. In case you are unaware, I certainly wasn't until I took this trip, and just had the most magnificent time. And I recognized that I got really lucky on the weather because it was very mercurial in nature. So there were moments when the wind was whipping through with gusts up to 50 miles per hour, but I had a good jacket. And one of the things that sort of charms me about myself, but I also recognize the perversity about it from other people's point of view, I really like cold plunges just because of how much it clears brain fog and gets me present with myself. And, there's just some really magnificent ways that I feel when I'm not in the first 30 seconds of saying bad words because I'm in the cold. And I felt like for going to the Yukon in early May, liking cold plunges was really useful because when I was, taking a breath because, suddenly I'd stepped out of the warm car and wind and cold and intensity, I could roll with it. I could stop and have an experience. And I also had really good gear, which I like to do. And then there were times when the wind was still and the sun was shining and, anything more than the lightest jacket felt completely unnecessary. I lucked out on a little bit of snow falling on me and a little bit of rain, but for the most part, water was not falling from the sky in some configuration, which made the running around and tromping and having experiences a lot more attainable. So I flew into Whitehorse, and the airline I traveled on was Air North, and I was particularly charmed because they give you a really nice snack and then they give you a warm cookie, which I thought was a lovely way to pass the time. And I spent a great deal of the flight on the way up because there was intermittent cloudiness, but a lot of visibility of seeing the land from above. And I was just mesmerized because, the Rocky Mountains that I'm more familiar with are kind of on the Colorado side, and they're very beautiful. But when you fly over the Rocky Mountains, you're like, oh, up, 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 mountains, snow covered, and then back down. And this was just this vista as far as the eye could see of these valleys with lakes and rivers, and then the snow-capped mountains and these really sharp peaks. And it was just this whole spread out tapestry rather than this, really specific culmination that I'm more accustomed to. So from the get-go, I was really enjoying the seeing of the land. And then we landed, and it's a sweet little tiny airport, but also very comfortable. Whitehorse has major grocery stores and rental cars and, all of the structure that could be attainable. And I took an Airbnb about 15 minutes out of town. And what was magnificent about this is it was absolutely lakefront. So in California, sometimes when they say lakefront, they mean something like the experience at Big Bear where, from this angle, you can see the lake. But this was absolutely no obstructions, nothing in the way, huge picture windows, just looking straight out over this beautiful lake that was in the process of thawing. So I got to see this movement of the play of light. In the distance, there were these epic snow-covered mountains and then the line of trees on the other side. And then all of this changeability where the lake would thaw more during the day and then would freeze up a little bit at night, but still have forward movement toward, the ice melting. And that was something that was really beautiful. A lot of the places that I went where there would be a river and about a third of it would be melted. And so you'd have this beautiful water and these shades of turquoise, the different colors of turquoise from that really vibrant blue to this really deep green, the Yukon River, really cool, beautiful green color. And it was just kind of this really rich tapestry. And one of the things that was really magnificent for me was I felt like I had the whole world to myself. So as I was traveling down the Alaska highway that can get kind of trafficked, it's a great, road trip to do in June. A lot of people have it on their bucket list over the summer, but I was there definitively before tourist season opened. And so I didn't have the experience of like needing to pull over because someone else wanted to go faster. There was just these huge stretches where looking up and down the highway, there were no vehicles for big chunks of time, which was really helpful because one of my favorite drives back, I got to see all kinds of wildlife. I saw a moose, I saw elk, I saw a bear, and wild horses. I didn't know there were wild horses in the Yukon, but there's apparently a little herd very close to Whitehorse that I saw. There's this area where they cut the grass back and the trees back to leave a really wide shoulder between the tree line and the Alaska highway. And apparently it's excellent grazing territory, later into the evening. Now, it was like 10 o'clock at night and the sun was just thinking about going over the horizon, not really even getting particularly dark, but that kind of what looked like late afternoon, but was actually kind of late into the evening, apparently was just a magnificent wildlife viewing kind of time. So I had a lot of fun with that. And everywhere it seemed like you look in the immediate Whitehorse area. So I went kind of one way down the Alaska highway and the other way down the Alaska highway, and then kind of up and down roads that those led to. I went through Carcross. I stopped by Emerald Lake. And I'd been trying to get to Whitehorse for a while. So back when the cruise ship started up again, just after COVID, I took an Alaska cruise. I got a crazy good price on it for a solo room with a balcony and, was just mesmerized. Loved the trip. But one of the things I wanted to do when I was looking at all the excursions was to take the full day trip where they take you over the mountain and down into the Yukon and then back again. And Canada had not opened up their borders at that point for that border crossing. And so I wasn't able to participate in it. It was also really late in the season. So, a lot of the tours weren't running. So I'd had this longing. So then I went back a few years later with my parents. I'm like, oh, Alaska cruise, so cool. You got to try it. And the Skagway port, we had a car rented and everything. Well, there's a great cliff wall that apparently was not as stable as it needed to be. So we ended up in other ports. And so alas, we're not able to do this. But this time I went straight there and I was able to have the experience. And I didn't have a lot of anticipating what it was. I knew there were hot springs and I love hot springs. So I felt really stunned a lot of the time looking around at the just epic beauty. Is so clean and clear and spacious, and you can look out over these amazing vistas. So you can stand at a lake and look across this gorgeous lake, and then there are these beautiful trees, and then behind them are these beautiful snow-capped mountains. And I don't know if all the mountains are, well covered in snow by the time it gets to June or July, but wow, I didn't have snow sticking at the ground levels I was at, but it was all over the mountains. And so it was particularly exquisite in pretty much any direction that you turned your head. And it seemed like it just kept getting more and more beautiful as I bebopped along. Haines Junction in particular had really beautiful mountains. It's not that far from Whitehorse, and they have a really nice visitor center. The gal there was very nice. She talked to me through the quote unquote hiking trails when I explained that I'm more of a meanderer in nature than a serious hiker. So what do you have that has this experience where you can just kind of meander along and see really cool things rather than taking a serious 5-mile hike? That's not my jam. I'm like, don't let the hiking boots fool you. That this is not what I'm here for. So she had some really, really great suggestions. And incidentally, if you are a serious hiker, early May might be a little bit too early to get there because a lot of the trails were still snowed in. And so there was more of a meanderer's paradise than a serious hiker's paradise for the experience. I did have a little bit of a scrabble over some snow-covered path that was a little bit edgy for me, but fortunately I managed to get up and past it and see some more magnificent vistas. There was also a really beautiful developed hot springs there. It's called Nordic Hot Springs, and it's a little bit on the pricey side. One thing that's nice as a traveler from the US at the particular moment I went was the dollar goes pretty far. So I spent a lot less than it felt like I was spending as a result of that. But even so, it's not super inexpensive, but it was so worth it. They have multiple saunas and steam rooms and cold plunges and all these warm pools and, a little bakery with, freshly baked goods. And I had a really wonderful time, just soaking in the pools, chatting with some of the locals, chatting with some people who were passing through, and again, looking at these magnificent snow-covered mountains. So for me, I've become interested in a little bit more slow travel than fast travel because young Katie, felt like she would never have a chance to go again. So I had to see everything. And there was a trip my mom still teases me about to this day where I basically kind of dragged her up and down the length of the UK. And I caught a cold while I was traveling. And my mom, confessed later, that she was in her heart of hearts feeling bad because she was a little bit glad because it would slow me down because, I was really wearing her out with the rate of change. And I've found that there's a lot of merit to being multiple nights in the same place. And the richness when you aren't trying to get somewhere. Like I love these road trips where you see all of this beautiful scenery, but I also love the stillness of being able to drop in and take spontaneous journeys and just really soak up the land. And this trip, while I wished it was longer and I will certainly go back, was a really nice blend of that. And the hot springs were a good piece of the being more yin and being more still and really soaking up the experience, because when we're not having to use all of our senses to navigate around or get somewhere or process a lot of information, a lot of times the subtle energies can be felt more. Although for me, the energy of the land was extremely potent, and I found it to be this really interesting combination of being really, really powerful, potent energy. So I would liken it in some ways to being in Sedona. And one of the reasons a lot of people love Sedona is even if you don't necessarily feel energy, a lot of people go to Sedona and they're like, I feel energy, I feel energy. But this was energy that felt really nourishing. And that's not particularly how I experienced Sedona. I don't know that Sedona, for my shamanic experience of Sedona, is all that interested in humans. I think it's just doing its Sedona thing. But this land, which I feel like is kind of ironic for a place that gets so intense in the winter that it really can become a place that becomes life-threatening very quickly. San Diego is a very benevolent place to live. There is not a lot of days where it would be hard to do whatever you have a hankering to do because of the weather. But there's just this sort of deep, rich, nourishing earth energy that seemed like this, absolutely unlimited supply that was also really gentle and warm and welcoming. I felt it a lot in the sacral chakra, not in the kind of buzzy way, but kind of a filling up the tanks of my vitality and my life wish and just really getting to be nourished and held by the land. A lot of waking up of the heart chakra, a very active principle. So this wasn't, a not very noticeable energy from my point of view, but I was comparing it because I tend to have a lot of love and affinity for places that would be a really bad match for me in winter. So I end up in Canada and I'm like, Canada in spring and summer, and fall, so magnificent. And, knowing intellectually that winter would not be nearly as benevolent. Montana, similarly. But I ended up kind of in my mind comparing it to Iceland. I went to Iceland a few years ago and I love Iceland. There's just euphoria for me about being on the land, and I love all the hot springs. I love the energetic principle of volcanoes, that there's something really delicious. And so Iceland has a potency that was really euphoric for me. The Yukon had a subtle flavor of euphoria, but it it was really just this deep, potent, nurturing kind of energy and this amazing, I don't want to call it psychically quiet, although I think of psychically quiet as being really available when humans aren't around, because I would argue that humans collectively are pretty psychically noisy. And there's certainly a lot of vibrance to an ecosystem that, as near as I can tell, in a lot of ways is doing really well. There are lots of open land that humans aren't messing with. And, I'm sure that people who specialize in this could tell all the struggles and all the difficulties. But I do think it's cool to visit places that just have vast swaths of land that are just doing their natural thing, and humans aren't particularly involved with. I know going through Denali in Alaska, there's just this one little narrow road for this vast amount of land, and they don't even let tourists be free range. You have to pre-book a campground, or otherwise you're going in and out on the bus, and you could get off at a few little specific places and tromp around if you want. But the humans are very, very contained, and there's all this natural land, and that's something that I find really magnificent. And certainly it's a quality that you can find in Iceland as well. But I don't think there's anywhere I've ever been that I just really felt the vastness, and some of that's the visuals of what you're looking at. There's all this open space. And I think that being there in early May really contributed to that, because it isn't tourist season. I wanted to take one of those flight seeing tours. It's a little bit of a financial stretch, but it's attainable. And I thought, oh, that would be super cool. And I called all the local companies, and they're all like, yeah, we have to have at least 2 people. And there's no one out here who's signing up at this time. So the absence of sharing these spaces with other humans, I think, influenced it. But also just in general, I think it's a real quality of the land that has this openness. And one of the side trips that made me really happy, I was headed for Haines Junction. So from the Whitehorse area out toward Haines Junction along the Alaska Highway. Very, very beautiful drive, just gets more epic as you go. And there was this side lake, and I'm probably going to say this wrong. It was the Kusawa Lake Campground, Kusawa Lake Campground. And it's along the Takahini, I think you say it, river. And it was this magnificently maintained dirt road that went off the Alaska Highway down to this campground. I think it was still technically the river, but it looked like this beautiful lake shore with mountains and not a soul around. And the road was kind of up over the river, so there were all these magnificent vistas down over the river with the trees and the rocks and the mountains in the background, and the areas where the river was thawing and moving, in the areas that, it still had that stillness of winter. And, it was just astonishingly beautiful and so deserted, almost eerily so. I don't know that it would be true in the height of summer, but I gotta say that Canadians seem to maintain their pit toilets in such a nicer way than what I've experienced in the States. So thank you so much, Canadians who are involved with that, for, magnificent services. But the campground, it was all open. There were toilets, but not a soul to be seen anywhere. So I did take bear spray, and the only bear I saw was from my car, which was lovely, because I was able to get close enough that if I'd been in a national park, the rangers would have yelled at me for being too close. But since I was in my car, no bear or human was disrupted in the process of this experience. But it was a little eerie, to be out on this really, dirt road that, for the experience and for the time of year was so very deserted and so very still, and no cell signal of any kind. But at the same time, there was just this really wonderful sense of adventure, of being able to have this unique experience, to really, feel more out in nature. And so I will probably strive to put myself back in the Yukon in May again, because I found it just a really, really magnificent time to be there. One place in particular I didn't spend a whole lot of time, but is so, so, so worth a stop and so attainable from Whitehorse. It's Miles Canyon, and they have a beautiful bridge, and the water is this really quite deep, opaque green that is extraordinarily beautiful against these tall walls of the canyon that it flows through. And there's some really great walking trails. You can get by the Yukon River right out of Whitehorse. They have a path that's adjacent, but you go just a little bit out of town and you could park and, tromp around. I wanted to go back, but everything that I was doing had this tension between, wow, it would be really nourishing to just sit and stare at this beautiful lake out this picture window and let this magnificent, nourishing, wonderful energy to soak into my bones, and allowing myself to rest and be held in it, versus the FOMO of, wanting to have the experiences. So I tromped around briefly, but it's definitely something that I will spend more time doing when I return, because there's a lot of really great beauty and energy. And if you're feeling like you don't love the idea of violating all the recommendations that you don't hike alone, because I blithely did so. I balanced the love of experience against the safety factor. And usually I'm pretty conservative about safety, but in this case, the richness of experience was really significant. But it's a place that has more people, so it absorbs a lot of people very easily. I didn't feel like it detracted that there were, other humans running around. I imagine in the summer it could be hard to find parking and such, but if you really don't want to go down a long dirt road all by yourself with no cell phone reception and not see another soul for, the next hour or two while you have that adventure, then, this can be a really lovely place to have an exquisite experience without necessarily going somewhere quite so remote. And just as a final thought, I think that for those of you who have studied shamanic journey, it's really magnificent to take journeys to meet with the guardian of the land. And in my book, Sacred Travel, it's a very short book, I talk about, different ways to connect in with the land and the guardians and to make offerings. One of the offerings I usually make, if it's accepted by the guardian of the land, is what I call spirit release work, which is if they're souls, if they're earthbound spirits, if they're soul fragments that didn't move on, I'd be really happy to help show them the way. That's one of the things I have a knack for. My team of guides is good at helping with that. And so I think it's really beautiful to sort of make an offering to the land of some kind, whatever that looks like. And I think that there's a richness to what is unfolded in travel where you don't have all the structured time. So one of the things I really enjoy is not being structured and not being scheduled and not having to be somewhere at a particular time. And I go to a lot of trouble to pack food with me so that I, don't have to worry about finding a restaurant, et cetera, and so forth. There's just something that's really lovely about being able to respond to where I'm most compelled to move and how I feel called to engage, and to do journey work for the sake of seeing what's available and what's on offer. A lot of the journeys I do have a really specific commitment. I'm doing a soul retrieval for this person, or I'm, asking about this health thing for someone, or I want some help with a question that I have of some kind. And the sort of open-ended, what does this place have to offer for me? I just want to talk to the land spirits that are, appropriate and for my highest and best good. You always want to have the discernment of filtering and knowing who you're talking to. But there's a real spaciousness of not having so much structure and agenda, and having that availability to have deeper intimacy with self, as far as driving down, the Alaska highway in either direction. I was laughing at myself because as a kid, my mom would put on classical music because she liked it, and partly to punish my sister and I if we couldn't quit squabbling in the car about whose turn it was to talk or, whatever else. All right, nobody gets to talk. And then she'd put on her classical music. So it kind of cracked me up to find myself playing classical music because I didn't want soft rock or Broadway show tunes or, a podcast or something really interrupting that vibe and flow and almost a little bit of a trance state. I'm reluctant to say that because I was certainly alert and aware and driving very safely, but there's just an availability to experience when you don't have so much structured time. And that's part of the richness where, everywhere you go, there you are. And there's some really rich opportunities to meet yourself particularly if you're blending, more engaged travel where you're going and doing things, but also some of that slow travel where there's just spaciousness to see what bubbles to the surface. So I hope that this illuminates some inspiration for you in one way or another. And thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.